The state of Florida is no stranger to off-the-wall abandoned buildings and quirky developers, and unbeknownst to many across the nation, but a little too well known to the residents of Orlando, is the Majesty Building, an 18-story office tower that was announced 24 years ago and has been under construction for the last 2 decades. The development sits off East Central Parkway, bordering Interstate 4 in the city of Altamont Springs. The building's owned by the corporation of Claud Bowers, who intended to use the building to house his religious television station. Join me today as we review the story of this structure, why it's taken so long to build, and what the future holds. My name is Lee Brees, and this is the story of the Majesty Building, better known as the eyesore on I-4. The full story dates back to 1977. That year, Claud Bowers and his wife Frida, along with some other Lake County, Florida residents, started a cable television station that featured Christian programming and broadcasted to 5 cities within Lake County. Bowers was hoping to model the station after televangelists Pat Robertson and Jim Bakker, and thought there would be a market in the greater Orlando area for a local version of religious television. They had to constantly run telethons to keep the station going, and it was difficult to get churches on board at first for sponsorship and content. But over time, those folks would more or less come around. 5 years later, the couple launched analog television channel 55 with call letters WIYE, which still broadcasted inside Lake County. In the same year, Claud and his son Victor formalized their venture and formed Associated Christian Television Systems, Inc., a commercial business. After 5 more years of growth, the Bowers were able to get a new transmitter that was capable of 5 million watts of power, which allowed their station to be broadcasted across the majority of the Central Florida area. With newfound reach, they rebranded themselves as Superchannel 55 with new call letters WACX, and the network was able to reach an additional 1.1 million viewers through cable television. It seemed sort of odd that despite being mostly funded by private donations and viewer contributions, that Claud Bowers kept the station as a commercial business and not as a nonprofit. It may have just been personal preference, but in 1995, when ACTS applied for a tax exemption to use land in Lake County for a relay tower, their application was denied due to Claud Bowers' reported salary, which was self-imposed at almost $120,000. And the county deemed the station didn't need the tax break. In January 1998, with the station on the up and up, Bowers announced that Superchannel 55 would be constructing a new headquarters that would feature broadcast studios, office space for WACX and tenants, and condominiums. The building would be 260,000 square feet and was planned for a site in Altamont Springs along Interstate 4. The original development featured 2 towers, one that housed the broadcast studio and 70,000 square feet of office space, and the other would feature timeshares and hotel rooms with a 400-seat auditorium and would have a parking garage for over 1,000 cars. Bowers stated that internal research showed there was an undertapped timeshare market in Orlando, and specifically for ones with a Christian family environment. Despite the scale of the development, Bowers said he was going to be funding the entire project with cash, and no debt would be issued for its construction. The original thought was that funds from the sale of timeshares would be enough to cover the ballpark estimated $20 to $40 million in construction costs. Nonetheless, Bowers believed the building would be ready for WACX to move into by December 1999. 3 years later, the project began, and ground was broken for the office and studio portion in February 2001, but final renderings at this point only showed one main tower. Features now included an open-air 16th floor balcony with views of Crane's Roost and Uptown Altamont. The rotunda on the first several floors would have space for restaurants, shops, and banquet and convention space, all housed on the 4.7-acre property. Claud Bowers had only been able to raise $13 million so far for the project, but still began construction anyway. So once the money ran out, things at the site just stopped. Even though Bowers wasn't able to raise enough money to cover the full cost of the project, He was still committed to keeping the Majesty Building debt-free, and local officials at the time championed the mentality. Now, though, the project was in a pay-as-you-go state, and most days out of the year, the property sat abandoned. In 2003, a local paper interviewed the televangelist turned Majesty Building developer, and he said the building would be ready in 1 year's time. He was then asked the same question again in 2006, by which point the concrete main structure had been enclosed with glass, and he said the same thing. Then 2008 happened, and by the time 2010 rolled around, he said he'd have it ready in 2012. In 2005, WACX converted to an all-digital signal as analog was phased out, and in their filings with the FCC, when asking for permission to broadcast on a specific digital channel, their request was granted, but on the condition that they would be operating out of their new facility with updated equipment, which obviously didn't happen, but it's unclear whether they faced any penalties for this. Local reporters found themselves dumbfounded as year after year they would ask the same question to get the same response. Next year. Given its prolonged, unfinished state, the site grew weeds and had leaks develop, but Bowers claimed that progress was made over the course of the next 15 years and insists that construction was never halted. However, visible evidence didn't surface until sometime in late 2016 when the parking garages finally began to go up. Local officials stated that Bowers had met all the inspection and building code requirements, and despite the now locally infamous eyesore on I-4 moniker, many still lauded him for keeping the project debt-free, even as residents started a Facebook page attempting to get the structure torn down. One of the biggest milestones for the project came in July 2018, when for the first time in 17 years of construction, lights in the building were turned on, and the Majesty Building finally had power. In August 2019, Bowers stated that the last major project was construction of the other parking garage, with only interior work left on the structure, and he fully expected once again that Superchannel 55 would be moving in less than 12 months later. And then 2020 happened. Here we are 21 years later, and the tower is still not finished. They did broadcast the July 4th fireworks from the top of the building in 2019, though. Bowers has claimed several practical reasons, however, as to why he can't get the project finished. Most obvious, he cited the supply chain and labor shortage issues that have plagued the world since the start of the 2020 pandemic, as they continue to inhibit the already slow progress on the building. He also claims that the widening of I-4 has also decreased his ability to have conclusive work done on the tower, and construction on nearby office buildings has made it even more difficult to find available contractors and enough workers. And yet, the jokes and local hoopla about the project are seemingly infinite. Bowers' last on-the-record statement estimating the completion date was 2018. He then estimated that the building would be complete by fall 2022. All I-4 express toll lanes coming out of the ultimate I-4 project are now complete, so really it's just the lasting issues of the pandemic and lack of consistent cash flow keeping the building from being finished. Bowers has alluded to the budget wildly surpassing the original estimate of $20 to $40 million, and some have speculated that he really would have been better off just taking a loan and getting the building open much earlier, and he's now actually lost money due to lost rent and lost revenue. In 2019, Bowers said the station would likely begin having telethons again to raise additional funds to finish construction. Public records show both Superchannel 55's revenue and donations have trended down the last several years, which contributed to lack of progress at the Majesty Building. One of the things that Bowers has not been paying for on the property is taxes. The site's assessed value has been based purely on the value of the land itself for the last 2 decades, but local officials affirmed that the taxes would go up once substantial progress was completed. It's estimated that the property tax bill would go from around $20,000 annually to more than $400,000. However, this hinges on how the local assessor decides to date the building, as age is factored into assessed value, And the assessor is already on record stating how completely unprecedented this situation is. I personally visited the building in April 2022. The parking garages looked finished, about 90% of the glass appeared to be completed, and there were actually workers on site finishing a portion of the roof on the rotunda. The sheer scale of the project is not something to be underestimated, and compared to its surroundings, the Majesty Building is actually quite enormous. And I wouldn't be surprised if the final construction cost is well over triple what the original estimated budget was. I admire the guy for trying to be debt-free, which is unique, but this is really a philosophical statement taken too far. Certainly in the research, Bowers put together a report of estimated operating costs and revenue for the life of the building, and I would think there would be a year to which could be calculated that he would have the loan paid off or break even after interest. Even 10 years in, why not get a loan to finish the rest? You've already lost so much rental income. Given that Superchannel 55 is privately held and mostly viewer funded, I do wonder if Claud Bowers could have even qualified for the loan he needed to construct the Majesty Building. Perhaps he just really wanted this nice building and was determined to make it happen even if it didn't make sense or wasn't possible on paper. If you would like to contribute to the completion of the Majesty Building, they are currently selling paver stones on their website for unbelievably reasonable prices. Claud Bowers has given no updated completion date, nor has said anything on the record whether the building will be finished by the fall. We'll just have to wait and see just how much longer it takes for the Majesty Building to finally open its doors.